allies are trying to figure out how best to help Ukrainians without putting boots on the ground. And so there's this massive effort underway to bolster Ukraine's military defenses and to try to chip away at Russia's huge numbers advantage. The U.S. has already supplied Ukrainian forces with thousands of missiles, and now a plan to have key allies provide Ukraine with fighter jets is starting to gain traction. Meanwhile, you have critical military shipments arriving through a secret airfield near the Ukrainian border. And here to discuss all of this is CNN military analyst, retired Air Force Colonel Cedric Layton. And Colonel, we're told right now, as you look at the numbers, the U.S. and NATO allies have been providing about 17,000 anti-tank missiles. That includes the Javelins, plus some 2,000 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles. How significant is this? Is it any match against the Russian military?
Well, it is significant, Anna, and what's so interesting about this, just from a pure numbers perspective, these numbers are actually reaching a match level to the Russian incursion here. And when you look at the number of tanks that the Russians have and the number of anti-tank missiles, to include the Javelins that you mentioned, that one for one would be quite a match against Russian tanks. Not all of them, of course, are going to hit their target, but it is a very significant increase in Ukrainian armament, absolutely.
And in addition, we know the U.S. is trying to work out a deal for Poland to provide fighter jets to Ukraine. These would be backfilling or restocking what Poland is giving up with F-16 fighter jets that would be sent to Poland. But we know time is of the essence right now because Ukraine's airfields are dwindling.
That's right. And, here's one of the big problems is that Ukrainian airfields have been attacked in the last day or so by the Russians. They went after one of the key airfield at Vinnytsia, which is actually the headquarters of Ukraine's Air Force Command, and they basically cratered the runways. That makes it impossible for aircraft to land or take off. So that's going to be a challenge. So if they bring the MiG-29s in from Poland, they're going to have airfields that the MiG-29s can operate out of in order for them to be effective against Russian targets.
It does sound like Ukraine is, at least at this point, holding its own in the air. We're told the skies above Kiev are still contested between Russia and Ukraine. As far as Russia's firepower right now, we understand that Russia has fired a total of 625 missiles since this invasion began. That's according to a senior Pentagon official, and that does not include shells and rockets. Can you help us understand what is the difference between shelling and bombing, rockets and missiles, etc.?
Yeah, it's not much of a difference when you're the target because it explodes and you're affected by it, sometimes lethally. But in basic terms, the bombing usually occurs from the air. Shelling, would be artillery shells, ground-based platforms that shell into the area. Rockets are a little bit more sophisticated than that. They are basically small missiles that go into a particular target. Some of those are guided missiles, some of those are unguided missiles, more primitive. But the basic effect between artillery, bombing, and missiles is to soften up the territory that you're trying to get into. So from the Russian perspective, what they're trying to do is they're trying to weaken the defenses of the Ukrainians, weaken their resistance, and then move into the territory that then becomes open for them to move into.
But I wonder just how targeted those weapons can be, because we know that there have been hundreds, at least hundreds of civilians killed. According to the UN, it's more than 400 so far. And we're seeing some of the civilians killed trying to flee. Evacuees, we've seen schools, shops, churches, all targeted or at least hit. But is it clear that Russia is targeting civilians, or could Russia be shelling and bombing indiscriminately, resulting in these horrific killings? How targeted and detail-oriented can you utilize those weapons?
So their weapon systems, there are some of the more modern ones that are a bit more precise that use things like GPS in order to get at their targets. However, a lot of the weapons that they're using are actually unguided weapons, which means that they're not directly targeted. They're targeted in the general direction that they're firing at, but they're not targeted to a specific coordinate on the map. That's very different from the American way of war, which is very much reliant on precision guided munitions. The vast majority of these munitions are not PGMs or precision guided munitions, Anna, and that makes the vast difference. They are, in essence, they're doing kind of both things. They're shooting indiscriminately, but they also don't care that they're hitting civilian targets because that's part of their plan. Their plan is to actually terrorize the civilian population, kind of like the big bombing raids during World War II, under what we would today call very primitive conditions. That's what the Russians are doing right now with all the weapons at their disposal.
Real quickly, I do want to just take a bigger picture look at what's happening, because everywhere in red on this map is where we have Russian forces right now. We know in the north, that's an area currently intensifying in terms of the fighting near Kiev. In fact, in Irpin, right here, Scott McLean mentioned, we've also learned that there have been tanks spotted. This is just outside the capital. Colonel, is Kiev as a priority for both Ukrainians and Russians? Can Ukraine keep holding Russia back here, do you think?
Well, it's going to be tough. They can, and it's going to be difficult, from a resupply standpoint. Resupplying Ukrainian defenders is going to be a really tough act, but it can be done. And, as they say, the defender has an advantage in a place like Kiev or any major city, because what they can do is they can basically use all of the different areas, all the buildings, all of the landmarks, everything like that, as a place from which to shoot from, and then to go back into and hide in. So they can use that to their advantage, and they can really stall a Russian advance, given they're not only their esprit de corps, but their efforts to employ weapons that we give them.
Colonel Cedric Layton, I really appreciate all of your time and expertise. Thank you for your guidance along the way here. He's isolated like never